Well, on this Good Friday, I would like us to consider the witness of the Centurion that stood watching over Jesus while he hung on the cross. In Mark's Gospel that we read together, it's recorded in verse 39 of Mark 15. It says, "And when the centurion, which stood over against him, saw that he so cried out and gave up the ghost, he said, 'Truly, this man was the Son of God.'" Now, Matthew and Luke, they also record this event. And Matthew adds a little more colour. He tells us that there were others there at the cross with the centurion. Well, we know that the Apostle John was at the cross. We know he was there. But the other apostles, they were being put to shame by a group of women. Apart from John, all the apostles, they'd all fled. They were fearful of what might now happen to them as a result of having been with Jesus. So they were fearful, but there was this group of women that were not going to let fear drive them away from the Master. And it's really them that we ought to emulate in our lives. But of course that wasn't who Matthew was referring to when he referred to others with the centurion. Matthew was referring to a small band of Roman soldiers that were at the cross also. Earlier, Matthew had recorded that these men, in fact Mark refers to as well, but these men shared out Jesus' clothes, and then they sat themselves down at the foot of the cross for the rest of their watch. And so it would have been these Romans, these men that were sat there, to whom the centurion declared, "Truly, this man was the Son of God." But really, my point this morning is that the centurion, and others, of course, the others that were there, they were all eyewitnesses of the crucifixion. Eyewitnesses. The way that some people speak today, you could be forgiven for thinking that that they believe that the crucifixion of Jesus was something that had simply been made up in some dark halls of power. But not so. Not so. There were people that actually witnessed these things happening. And Mark then, he draws our attention to the immediate circumstance that drew this statement from the mouth of the centurion. And what it was the way that Jesus died that appears to have really struck this centurion. Crucifixion was the common form of the death penalty by the Romans for non-Romans, only for non-Romans. Even they recognised how horrendous and humiliating it was, so they would not allow their own citizens to be executed in that way. But for non-Romans, it was the common form of the death penalty. And so, no doubt this centurion, he would have seen many crucifixions in his time as a soldier. Crucifixions, they tended to be long, drawn-out affairs with the weakness of the sufferer increasing as the clock ticked on. They got weaker and weaker, but it could literally drag on, in some instances, for days until death finally took the person. The two men that were crucified with Jesus, they had their suffering cut short by having their legs broken as the day drew towards its close, and that speeded up death because it then became much more difficult for them to breathe because they had no support for their whatever it is you use to breathe. They had no support to be able to breathe out, so that they would have, suffocated, But by that time, by the time those two had their legs broken, Jesus was already dead. The last thing that he said when he hung on that cross before dying was, "Father, into thy hands I commend my spirit." And the centurion, he had witnessed how he had then simply given up the ghost. That is to say, he had just died. The centurion had never seen anything like that before in his life. This was something new to him. Now Jesus, he had many times told his disciples that he was going to be killed, and he was determined to go to Jerusalem to bring this about. But he also told them, and you can read this in John's Gospel, in John 10, verses 17 and 18, he said to them, "Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life, that I might take it again. No man take it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again." And the centurion saw that in action. No ordinary person can just decide to die and then die. I don't recommend it, but you try. You just can't do it. It is simply impossible. But Jesus wasn't just, an ordinary person. And so the centurion could declare, truly, this man was the Son of God. Now, some people say that the centurion couldn't possibly have had that kind of understanding of Jesus as the Son of God that we Christians now have. Well, they were Roman soldiers, they say. What did they know of such matters? Well, it simply isn't true. It simply isn't true to say that they had no knowledge of these things. There are a couple of other centurions brought to our attention in the New Testament. In Luke's Gospel record, in chapter 7, verses 2 to 5, there we read, "And a certain centurion's servant," so certain centurion, his servant, "who was dear unto him, was sick and ready to die. And when he heard of Jesus, he sent unto him the elders of the Jews, beseeching him that he would come and heal his servant. And when they came to Jesus, they besought him instantly, saying that he was worthy for whom he should do this. And they said, For he loveth our nation, and he hath built us a synagogue." That was the centurion. They said, "This centurion loveth the nation and has built us a synagogue." So that centurion they considered worthy, those elders of the Jews. And then in the book of Acts, in chapter 10, verse 22, there it says, "Cornelius, the centurion, a just man, and one that feareth God, and of good report among all the nation of the Jews." There's another centurion of good report among the nation of the Jews. So you see then that it is simply untrue that Roman soldiers had no idea of the hopes and aspirations of Israel. Some of them clearly did. And so this one standing guard at the cross, he could say truly, without a doubt, he could say, this man was the Son of God. And of course, he doesn't deny that Jesus was a man. I mean, he could see that with his own eyes, couldn't he? He saw the blood oozing from the wounds that he had suffered when he was taunted and tortured before he was even crucified. The 40 lashes, the crown of thorns, these all left their bloody marks. Yet it was clear that nobody took Jesus' life from him. The centurion saw that with his own eyes. He willingly gave up his life. And of course, that's the message we preach. That's the message we preach here. That Jesus Christ gave his life as a ransom for many. It was a ransom. You know, every single human being since the beginning, is in bondage. A lot of people, even these days, they talk about man's free will. And of course, it is true that nobody forces us to do anything that we don't want to do. It's not like we're robots or something. Nobody forces us to do what we do. But just how free are we? How free are we? Back in the 16th century, this was a hot topic even then. Perhaps more so then than it is now. But things were getting out of hand. And people were saying that humans could do all kinds of things. Well, Martin Luther, many of you I'm sure have heard of him. He wrote a book seeking to rectify some of the bad teaching that was going about. And his book, that book was called The Bondage of the Will. Now, the essence of that book is that although people can do whatever they like, they can only do that which is in accordance with their nature. And that's the plight, if you like, of the human nature, because that's where the problem lies. Because by nature, we want to rebel against God, our Maker. That's what we want to do. We never want to do what we were originally created to do. In short, of course, we were created to glorify God. That is, in everything, we were to honour him, to magnify him, in every act that we undertook, every word and thought. Because that's now just about the last thing that we want to do. We might do some specific things that God requires of us, but we don't do them out of any deference to our God. And this rebellion, that's what the Bible calls sin. Now, you might not have realised that. You may have thought that sins were just some kind of very bad actions. But those bad actions are called sins, but they're called that because they spring from this sinful nature. And that is life then in the human's natural state. We are held captive in this rebellious condition, and there's nothing that we can do about it. And of course, there's nothing we want to do about it, which is why it's so difficult to get out of. And yet it is a problem. Just the fact that we don't want to get out of it doesn't mean it's not a problem. It is a problem. That's because as rebels, humans are cut off from God. And God is the fountain of all that is good. Now, I know that many of us in this world still enjoy much of the goodness of God. It's what we tend to call common grace. Jesus, when he walked this earth, he taught that God maketh his sun to rise on the evil and on the good, and sendeth rain on the just and on the unjust. That's in Matthew 5:45 in the Sermon on the Mount. So, God's goodness is experienced and known by all mankind in whatever state they are in. So that then begs the question, well, why would you care? Why should you care if you still enjoy all these good things? What difference does it make to you if you are a rebel cut off from God? What difference does it make? Well, the thing is that state isn't going to exist forever. Common grace isn't going to last for everyone forever. A final, an absolute separation will be made, and eternity will be a very long time to be without the goodness of God. Now, I don't need to tell you that death is not the end for you. Every ounce of your being knows that. And this is where Jesus laying down his life willingly becomes especially important. As I said a moment ago, Jesus gave his life a ransom for many. He said that himself. You can look it up in Mark 10:45 or Matthew 20:28. He paid the price. He paid the ransom to set his people free from their captivity, from their bondage to sin. Now, the price of that captivity was set right at the beginning by Adam, the first man. He was told that if he disobeyed God, he would surely die. The Hebrew is more like dying, you shall die. But that's what he did. He ignored the warning. And that's why for everybody born into this world, the one certainty is death. Even while we live, we are dying. And of course, that's something else we all know. But death is the price of sin. And to set us free, somebody that did not deserve to die needed to die. So Jesus came, a perfect man. Pontius Pilate said before he handed him over to be crucified. Before that, he said, "Behold, the man," he said. The man. And so Jesus, he willingly gave up his life there on the cross. And again, as the centurion declared, truly this man was the Son of God. Yes, Jesus was a true man, but not just a man. He was the Son of God. And being the Son of God means that he is in fact God. That wasn't lost on the Jews of his day. Now, we read of those, the ones that didn't like him, we read of them in John 5 verse 18. Therefore, the Jews sought the more to kill him, because he had not only broken the Sabbath, but said also that God was his Father, making himself equal with God. It wasn't lost on them. The Son of God is God. But that God should take on frail human flesh for the purpose, for doing it for the very reason of suffering and dying such a horrendous death, is absolutely staggering news. But if we are to be set free from our sin, if we are to be forgiven people, this is what is required. No regular human being could pay the price, because we all deserve to die anyway. But God in the flesh, Jesus, was free from the taint of sin, morally perfect in every way. And not only so, but dying for the sin of others meant that he had to bear the burden of that sin. If he was not God himself, he simply would have been crushed by the weight of God's anger against all that sin. Yet having such a divine nature, he could sustain his manhood under that fearsome and terrible weight. And the centurion, he caught a glimpse of that. He could see in the way that Jesus died that while he was a man, he wasn't just any man. He was convinced from all that he had heard and all that he had seen that Jesus was the Son of God. Had this centurion arrived at the cross just before Jesus died, he may not have drawn that conclusion. But having heard Jesus, he was certain of what he said. This man was the Son of God. So I ask, how about you? How about you? Well, I know you cannot hear Jesus in the way that the centurion did, but you can still hear him. We have a record of his life and his teaching right here in this book, in the Bible. You can hear him. And you have heard some of this morning. That centurion was probably the second person converted after Jesus was nailed up. The first person, of course, was one of the other men that was crucified with him. But you too can be converted. You can know your sins forgiven. You can be set free to enjoy a relationship with God through Jesus. And I say to you, don't get palmed off with empty religion. Listen to what the Bible actually says rather than what you think it says. And then live to the glory of God as you were originally created to do, by putting your faith in Jesus Christ as your Lord. And if he is your Lord, you will experience his saving power. You will truly be released from your bondage to sin and all that entails. Amen.